and Goblin Reddit. Today's story is
My mother-in-law acted unforgivably during the death of my son. I never imagined that 3 years later I would discover the dark secret that explained everything. I was suggested to post my story in this subforum, as it seems more appropriate. I need to share what has happened to me, get unbiased opinions, let off steam and free myself from this burden. I am using an anonymous account because the details are extremely personal and I prefer to remain anonymous. Note, this story is long because I tend to be a detail-oriented person. What I will share is just one problem within an extremely complicated year, as there is much more to tell. To begin with, my son passed away. My little boy was just 13 months old. He was a completely healthy child. We adored him and took care of him with our whole being. He was perfectly fine on Tuesday, and by the following Wednesday he was no longer with us. This situation alone would merit its own story. My relationship with my in-laws was relatively good, although my mother-in-law always displayed immature and unpredictable behavior. My wife had told me that her mother had had problems with alcohol in the past. As my confidence in my relationship with my wife grew, I expressed my concern that her mother might have brain damage from excessive alcohol consumption. This is where I need guidance. My son required emergency surgery because his brain, for unexplained reasons, began to swell. The doctors were forced to remove part of his skull to allow for expansion. My parents arrived barely an hour after my call. My in-laws, who this publication is mainly about, arrived much later despite living 30 minutes closer. My in-laws left as quickly as they arrived. My parents, on the other hand, remained constantly by our side. They slept on the uncomfortable tables in the waiting room, waiting for news on whether our little one would survive. He made it through that first operation, only to leave us on the day after Mother's Day. My parents never left our side, even though they hadn't brought any clothes or personal items. For their part, my in-laws did not show up until the moment of farewell. My mother-in-law arrived dressed in pajama shorts and a t-shirt so small that it did not adequately cover her torso. She began to question the nurse as to whether she had ever attended to Indian people. While we took our time to say goodbye, she played noisily with her iPad. The nursing staff arranged for us to take our son outside one last time, despite him being connected to life support. I should explain that our little boy rarely cried, but when he did, we would simply take him outside. This immediately cheered him up. Being outdoors was his favorite place in the world. My wife was the first to take him out one last time under the stars to say goodbye before it was my turn. Before I could do so, my in-laws asked us to hurry. I felt an immense rage. With the calmest voice I could muster, I said to them, "Please, leave." I wanted them to go back home. They interpreted my words as permission to enter. They stopped to clarify and I simply repeated, "Leave." We took our son inside and they disconnected the machines that were keeping him alive. It has been the most difficult thing I have ever had to face in my life. I have been diagnosed with depression, severe anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, and I am undergoing treatment with antidepressants as a result. As we waited for him to leave, we watched his skin slowly turn gray. My mother-in-law then decided to clean the hospital room. The problem was that she was throwing away our documents from the social worker for bereavement support. My mother intervened to stop her throwing them away, while I shouted at her to stop. All this was happening while my father-in-law and sister-in-law sat there doing nothing, with expressions of annoyance on their faces. When he finally left, my wife had to wait for the nurses to remove him from her arms, which was extremely difficult as the body was completely inert. My mother-in-law left immediately. When my wife sat up, she asked through her tears, "Where's my mother? I need a hug." We didn't see or speak to my in-laws for 2 days. The pain of grief was simply unbearable. I decided to clarify the situation and invited only my father-in-law to lunch. He arrived and made small talk, then got up to leave. I asked him, "What about lunch?" He replied that he needed to go home. We asked him to wait, as we had important matters to discuss. We explained how hurt we felt by my mother-in-law's behavior and he simply replied that she was not handling the situation well. We assured him that we would try to understand, but while we sorted our feelings, we asked him to please tell her not to contact us. We also mentioned that if she was having difficulties, she could choose not to attend our son's condolence visit, and we would understand. Her response was, "Well, I guess I'll go home and kill myself." I have no idea what she communicated to my mother-in-law. The next thing we knew, she called, saying, "I hear you're all upset with me. How unfortunate. I won't be attending the visit." And she hung up abruptly. I was furious. I felt that I had already failed as a father and I wasn't going to fail as a husband. I called her immediately and reprimanded her severely. Her response was, "I'm not going to talk to you if you're going to use that kind of language." I replied that she had no right to speak to my grieving wife like that and then pretend to occupy some kind of moral position. She hung up on me. He immediately called my wife, who had said and done nothing up to that point. He insulted her and hung up. He started calling us repeatedly every few seconds. Then he started sending threatening messages saying he would hurt us. I called my father-in-law and warned him to control the situation or I would be forced to contact the authorities. He begged me not to and took the phone away from my mother-in-law. The calls stopped. We received no support from my wife's family. They did not attend any of the events leading up to our son's condolence visit. My father-in-law arrived late for the visit, dressed in cargo pants and a worn-out golf shirt. A few days passed. I decided to call my wife's aunt, whom I didn't know well as they are not a close family. I asked her for her perspective on my mother-in-law. She told me that they had had a conflict more than 20 years ago. Apparently, it was over a sleepover that the aunt canceled because her daughter didn't want to attend. My mother-in-law, furious, said to her, "I hope you die." Then she drove to his house, knocked on the door and repeated face to face, "I hope you die." Apparently, my wife's family disappeared for 3 whole years. The extended family had no idea of her whereabouts. We later spoke to my wife's grandmother. She revealed that my mother-in-law had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder years ago and had a history of violent behavior, even repeatedly hitting the grandmother with a car door. The grandmother confirmed that they had lost contact with my wife and in-laws for 3 years. I feared that my mother-in-law could be violent towards my wife. My wife burst into tears, revealing that her mother had repeatedly beaten her during her bouts of drunkenness. Now we had a clearer picture. My mother-in-law suffers from a mental illness. My father-in-law knew about it and hid it. He was aware of my mother-in-law's instability and yet he took her to the hospital. He mishandled the situation by keeping everyone in the dark. My wife, with great respect, asked them for a period of time without communication following the advice of her therapist, as she needed to heal and her family was causing more harm than good. A few months passed until we finally heard from him again. I quote his email verbatim below, "I hope you are well, you are always in my thoughts. I am writing because we really need your help with Mom. She has been admitted to the psychiatric unit of the hospital on 2 occasions, once for 6 days, and then for more than 2 weeks. The origin of this problem was her reaction to the death of her grandson and how her response was addressed. As her therapist mentions, each person reacts to death differently and not all grieving processes are the same. I think it would be healthier if you two could get through this and start a healing process. Currently, Mom is relapsing into a very depressed state, triggered by 2 factors: the absence of her grandson and the absence of her eldest daughter. She expressed this to her therapist in her last session. I'm sure Mom misses you and thinks of you often, but she is nervous about reaching out because you may not be ready for this. Mom's therapist is very concerned about her mental state, so I think a phone call or a visit, just the 2 of you, would be a good option to see if you can reconnect on some level, even if you meet in a coffee shop or at Mom's therapist's office. Whatever you both feel comfortable doing. It may or may not work, but I see this as a viable alternative to the current situation. Please think about this and let me know if it is possible for us to meet. We really hope it is. Love, Dad. In her reply, my wife told him everything we had discovered and pointed out how he had failed as a father, including this email which lacked paternal concern for her well-being. She offered to meet with her mother's therapist, if that would help. His response was, "I'm sorry I disappointed you, have a nice life." This email provoked intense indignation in me. Not only did he show a lack of concern for my wife's emotional state, but he did not even attempt to re-establish communication before making a request. My wife has decided to end the relationship with her parents. I have supported her decision, as they have been toxic elements in our recovery process. Editorial note: I removed some personal details from my father-in-law's email. Thank you for all the support I have received. It has moved me to tears, but in a positive way. Update 1. My sister is 4 years older than me. We were relatively close, as my parents only had the 2 of us. She was always dominant towards me, but from the age of 12 I began to realize that she wasn't a kind person. My sister had done many unpleasant things to me over the years. However, I constantly helped her, even to my own detriment, because in my mind that's what family does. But she was never available when I needed her. The few times she agreed to help, she would back out at the last moment. I'd relate years of history, but I will go directly to the incident that tried my patience. 4 years ago, my wife and I were buying our first house. My brother-in-law had his own truck for his business. My sister offered to lend it to us to help us move, as my brother-in-law was quite ill with lung problems and could not help physically. Lending the truck would be her contribution. 2 days before the move, she called to tell me that she didn't want to wear out the vehicle. I felt stressed and annoyed because she was failing me again. However, I kept calm. She insisted that they couldn't help because my brother-in-law was very ill and his nurse would arrive on the day of the move. She offered to pay for the rental of a removal van and I could make the reservation. Perfect, I booked the truck and called her back. She shouted at me, saying that I should book it in her name so that she could claim it back on her taxes. I agreed to her request. She gave me her card number and then asked, "What now?" I replied, "Aren't you going to ask me to help you move?" I was wondering what was going on in her mind. She had spent months telling me that they couldn't help, even during that conversation. I replied that I wasn't going to. She became enraged again and accused me of using her only for her money. At that point I had had enough, so I replied, "You know what? If you have such a low opinion of me, the truck has already been booked on my credit card. I'm fine." I hung up and didn't speak to her again for 2 years. What made me restore the relationship was that my brother-in-law was terminally ill. I decided that no matter how complicated the situation, everyone deserves to have a family. I reached out to her and asked if she needed anything. She asked me to visit her husband in the hospital, and so I did. I visited him weekly until he was transferred to a more distant center and then I started calling him on the phone. He passed away while waiting for a lung transplant. My mother told me the news and I said I would go straight to my sister's house. My mother warned, "You may not be welcome there." I replied that it didn't matter, family is family. If she threw me out, I would accept it. I had to try to be there for her and her children. We never really resolved our issues, we just pretended they didn't exist. I returned to attending family events in an attempt to provide them with a sense of family. My son was born approximately 6 months later. It became more difficult to be available for her as I struggled to adapt to my new role as a father, with a stressful job. But I made sure I was there for the difficult moments. My sister made little effort to become part of my son's life. I found it confusing because initially she was very excited about his birth, describing him as a source of light in her life. She made frequent trips to my city and drank alcohol at the bar on the corner of my house without even visiting us. I found out that she had started to have intimate relationships with other people after her husband passed away. I am not one to judge this kind of behavior, and considering that my brother-in-law was sick for so long, I understand that she might have needed it. I supported her initially. Then she started to have relationships with my mother's boss. Things started to get out of hand. My nephew quit hockey because he was being bullied in the changing rooms. We were all surprised because he loved the sport and was very sociable. We later discovered that my sister had had a relationship with one of the team's parents, a married man. Later we learned that she had had a disagreement with her best friend. She just told us that she was a terrible person. For the friend we found out that they had argued about my sister's new boyfriend. She couldn't stand him because he was involved in the trafficking of illicit substances. We have relatives in law enforcement, so we investigated. Sure enough, he had been charged as recently as 2016. He was set free on a technicality. Her driving license had also been suspended, but she still drove the car with the children in it. The family tension increased considerably. Then my son passed away. She made some effort while he was in hospital, but then she disappeared. She ignored the celebration of his life that we organized, without explanation or contact. I gathered all my strength to attend my son's 8th grade graduation the following week. She refused to sit with us or even speak to us. After that, I stopped communicating with her. She sent me a message last month saying she was giving me space, her way of saying she was ignoring me. I expressed my disappointment and how contemptuous she had been. I reprimanded her severely and blocked her number. This time I have definitely ended this relationship. It turns out she was pregnant with the dealer's child. She named him after her late husband. I joked about it with my therapist, commenting that my life seemed to have turned into a sensationalist television program. I sent a message to my nephew when I thought it was safe to do so, as she often checks his phone and reads his messages. Sometimes she even replies pretending to be him. I told him how much I loved him and that, although he was no longer part of his mother's life, I would continue to be present in his. I assured him that he would always have my support if he needed it and that my door would always be open to him. I feel he will need it. I know from my mother that last week he told my sister to leave. Please do not think that my nephew is disrespectful. He is a young man of integrity who attends a Christian school. He has suffered enormously and has simply had enough of her. Just like the rest of us. Update 2. Some time has passed. I wanted to share new information and details that I had not mentioned before. Since my last post, we have had no contact with my wife's family. Email was our last communication. We spent Christmas with my wife's aunt. She asked if we wanted to know anything about them. We replied that we did not, that we no longer cared. They are out of our lives. We struggle daily with our loss. We do it without any support, as my parents live far away. Circumstances were extremely difficult last year. The unemployment benefit was insufficient. During my bereavement leave, I was dismissed. I was under contract, so there were no laws to protect me. I tried to take my own life on 2 occasions. I felt that I had failed as a father and again as a man. Finally, I consulted a psychiatrist and now I am undergoing treatment with antidepressants. This week I am starting with a new counselor who specializes in grief, and I have started to look for work, as I finally feel capable of doing so. My wife recently gave birth to a baby girl. I now have a daughter. A small part of me has started to heal, although it is a bittersweet feeling to be a father again. We told very few people about the pregnancy, maybe 10 at most. Any complications could arise during a pregnancy. We didn't want to face the world if we lost another child. I later realized that the people we trust enough to share the news with are the same ones who came to visit us to see how we were. It's hard to hide a pregnancy when people can physically observe how your wife is changing. I mentioned this because my sister decided to cut off all communication with us. Naturally, she was unaware of the pregnancy. On the day my daughter was born, I informed my nephew. I love him too much to exclude him. I guess he told his mother and she went ballistic. I don't understand the reason, beyond her narcissism and her need to be the center of attention. She called and severely reprimanded my parents. Meanwhile, her drug-dealing boyfriend sent me a message saying how terrible my parents and I were. I replied with a single message: my son is dead. My daughter has just been born. Is this the kind of person you want to be today? He insulted me. I told him not to lose his dignity and I blocked his number. I should mention that my sister and her drug dealer boyfriend also had a baby last year. They didn't tell me. I'm baffled by this double standard. My sister spent the first week of my daughter's life calling all of our mutual acquaintances with whom she was still in touch, demanding to know if they knew about the pregnancy. Of course, as we had kept it a secret, they all replied in the negative. This was my last indirect contact with her, although I doubt she will remain silent. My sister-in-law, whom I had not yet mentioned, unblocked us on social networks. I can only assume she did it while trying to see photos of our daughter. She also sent us a gift for the baby without a return address. I believe she did this to force us to open it before we could identify its origin. We have donated her gift to a charity, as we do not want to have any connection with her. My wife does not want reminders of her family around. I do not know if my mother-in-law is aware of the birth of my daughter. My wife's grandmother asked everyone not to inform her, as it could destabilize her mental health. Update 3. Greetings to all, it's been a while. I have numerous updates to share. I will start by talking about myself. I have been under the supervision of a counselor and a psychiatrist. We seem to have found a proper balance of medication for depression and anxiety. Lately I have felt considerably better. Thanks to my psychiatrist, I was approved for disability payments. I now have a certain income. Because of this, we decided that my wife should return to work while I take care of our daughter. I have been a full-time father since September. Everything has gone well. My daughter is now older than my son was when he passed away. We still have no contact with my mother-in-law or my wife's immediate family. However, my wife's aunt has been very understanding. I have developed a greater insight into the toxic nature of my wife's family relationship. I thank you all for that. My wife attended bereavement counseling for our son, but today she began specific treatment to address the problems with her family. She returned home noticeably happy, which is encouraging to witness. Now let's move on to the truly complex situation, my sister. She definitely has narcissistic personality disorder. Accepting this reality has helped me enormously. I now understand that my sister is incapable of loving me as I deserve. She continues her relationship with a drug dealer and they are currently engaged. My oldest nephew is almost 16. He has a full-time job and plays on the basketball team. He uses these activities as an excuse to avoid staying at home. Recently, worrying problems have arisen. My 13-year-old niece has been physically and verbally abused. She has been kicked and slapped. They have immobilized and gagged her with duct tape. They regularly insult her. The justification they offer is that she socializes mainly with boys. What they don't understand is that she socializes with them because she shares their level of maturity. She doesn't enjoy gossiping with girls her own age. She prefers to play soccer and hide and seek with boys. My niece met a young Lebanese man at a church event. They hit it off immediately and became friends. My sister found a photo of them on social media and lost it. She made a xenophobic speech telling my niece that Muslims would love to capture a blonde girl and take her to Lebanon. This was extremely confusing to me because, first, they met at a church event and, second, we did not grow up in an intolerant environment. My niece believes that the trafficker introduced these prejudices into the home. It also baffles me because I am of mixed German and Japanese descent. My niece was banned from seeing this young man simply because of his ethnicity. However, one day they met in a shopping center. The trafficker grabbed the boy, put a knife to his neck and threatened him to get him away from my niece. He was arrested for this incident and later released pending trial. They blamed my niece for the whole situation and began to assault her at home. It all culminated when my sister said to her, "I hope you end your life." My niece then went to the kitchen, took a knife and tried to self-harm. My niece's school friends reported it to Child Protection Services, who launched an investigation. My sister warned my niece that if she lost custody of any of her children because of this situation, she would disinherit her and no longer love her. Due to the charges against the trafficker and the Child Services investigation into my sister, who had cut off all communication with my parents, she desperately contacted them. As an alternative, my mother suggested sending my niece to live temporarily with them in the South. My sister, in desperation, accepted. My niece is now safe and happy with my parents. Both they and I agree that they must keep her with them at all costs. She cannot return to that abusive environment. I will keep you informed about whether they obtain legal custody, as the battle is just beginning. We gradually receive snippets of information from my niece as she recalls incidents. She says that the trafficker uses substances and when he is under the influence he becomes paranoid. He takes out a large knife and keeps it with him. He often forgets it and leaves it on the sofa where the little boy can find it. I had to ask my niece something I already suspected, but I needed confirmation. She revealed that she and her older brother did not attend the celebration of my son's life because my sister forbade it. My niece and nephew still love me, but their mother has kept them away from me. Deep down, I knew this was the case, but it is still painful to confirm that I was deprived of their love and comfort at the most difficult time of my life. I will provide more information when I have it. Update 4. I'm sorry for leaving you without news for so long. I decided to take a break from Reddit, as writing about family issues really takes its toll emotionally, even if the events happened a while ago. Remembering them is still painful, and despite the time that has passed, the wound lingers. I will try to pick up where I left off, talking about my niece. Fortunately, she did not have to return to her mother or the trafficker. My parents obtained legal custody. My sister did not even try to complicate the process. She already had an opinion about my niece and apparently preferred to keep her away. The situation with my nephew was different. At least he did not experience the same kind of violence as my niece, and when he came of age, he left home. The case of my youngest niece, the trafficker's daughter, was completely different. My parents tried to contact Child Protection Services, but on each visit they could not find sufficient grounds to remove the parents' custody. I recognize that trying to separate a child from their parents is extreme, but in my sister's case, it was fully justified. Fortunately, after months of trying to find some way to protect that baby, the boyfriend was arrested for possession and attempted distribution of illegal substances. He will remain in prison for a long time. Surprisingly, this turned out to be beneficial for everyone, because my sister realized that she did not want to take on the responsibility of raising my young niece. She offered custody to my parents, who were already taking care of her other daughter. The meeting with my parents' lawyers, so that she would formally relinquish custody, was extremely tense. My sister did not stop hurling insults, including derogatory comments towards my other niece, who was not even present. But they signed all the necessary documents and put up with her behavior, solely for the well-being of my niece. It was essential to take her away from her mother. After that, neither my parents nor I know what has happened to my sister. We know that she returned home, but we have not kept in touch with her and we do not know if she is still there or if she has moved. The situation is similar with my in-laws. They are people with whom it is extremely difficult to relate, and I am glad that they have kept their distance. As for our own life, we continue to struggle to live with the pain of losing a child. Having another child is not a replacement, nor does it make us forget, but at least our daughter has brought us some comfort, if that makes sense. Few things in our life now seem to, but we continue to try to find some peace. This will be my last update, as I had no intention of returning. However, I felt obliged to provide closure to this story, although I would prefer not to go over all the painful details of my life again. That is why I've tried to keep this update as concise as possible.